Bring it back. But not today, obviously. It's something like that.
Yeah, you guys are smart. Like you guys understand what these
Yeah.
We were at the library.
Except, I do want to tell this story with you. Back when we were in the poker a little bit, and you was kind enough to invite me to poker night at his house. And you talk about like you don't do the sucker at the table. As I walk in, it's all used math now. So like you talk about David Wallace, this is not going to end well. Yeah. Someone one break and get out of here.
You'll be the first math professor not play good. I play a lot of things over.
He's good.
Just memorize 10
He just comes on cards and can the blind odds like that. But yeah, he's not good.
It's all about math.
Not well.
He came home early.
Came up with tears.
He's like, oh, math guy.
I played last time I was playing, I was small, $200 buy-in time. This guy sat down and about 20 minutes later, got up smiling.
Hello, everybody.
You're not playing the
Before anybody tells me, I am standing up. Welcome to East Chapel Hill Rotary. Pretty good crowd here. Pretty good crowd. I'm going to start off real quick by just telling you a quick story of something that happened this week, kind of Rotary related. A lot of you remember Woody Burns, who used to be a member of this club. His son, Ross Burns, lives in Denver. He's a friend of Omar. And last year, my wife and I were on a trip out west, and we went to a baseball game in Denver, and I was standing in the line for beer, and I was wearing a Carolina hat. This guy was standing beside me in the next line, and he saw my hat and said, "Hey, I'm from Chapel Hill." I said, "Well, I am too." It turned out to be Ross Burns. And so we had a good conversation there. So this week, of course, there's a group that sometimes goes to lunch at Redmond's on Tuesdays. And Omar had Ross Burns visiting, who was in town, came to lunch at Redmond's. And so we were sitting there rehashing about our meeting last year in Denver. And all of a sudden it dawned on me. I pulled my phone out and I found a picture that I had taken that night at the ball game. It was the exact same date a year later, July the 11th. Small one. I want to call on the 9th president of East Chapel Hill Rotary, Mr. Bill White, to give the invitation.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we are very thankful that we live in this country. And we are also blessed to be in the terrific Rotary Club. Please be with those people who are not as fortunate as we are. And pay close attention to some of our members who are suffering with health issues. And may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. Bless this food, the nourishment of our bodies, and us to thy service. be with our children and grandchildren, wherever they may be. Amen.
Amen.
Anybody have, I know we do because there's a whole list of guests.
I'm delighted to have Katie Massoud be my guest today. Katie is the Director of Development at UNC Keenan-Flagler Business School, and I've had the great fortune to know her the past couple of years as we've developed a mentoring program for women who are getting their MBAs.
So Bob mentioned his connection with Rotary. I have someone here who has even greater connection. And where's Jim Hebner? Even longer than Jim. Laurie here, who's visiting, went to see her grandparents every year in Evanston, in Illinois, Evanston, Illinois. And right across the street, we all know where the headquarters of Rotary International is. So every day she'd walk outside. So and we don't know how old you are, we won't ask, for multiple years, and she's now temporarily not working because her people that she has, that she looks after, are all on strike in Hollywood. So she has some time here. And then my old friend Roger, who I played tennis with for 67 years, is here visiting. So welcome, Roger.
Any more? Yes?
It's my pleasure to introduce you all to my neighbor, Marshall Woodworth, who's a guest, first-time Rotary. He's recently retired. He's semi-retired. Gentleman who's quite interested in our club, why, and it's a privilege to bring him here for you all to meet. He promises me that he is going to ask a question about the Armenian-Penrose conjecture theory, which he doesn't seem to agree with.
More guests?
Y'all, my wife Katie's here with us today for lunch.
Okay, more? Visiting Rotarians, I know there were some of those here.
Yeah.
Visiting Rotarians? Somebody's put their name on the sheet. Yeah. Okay, that's good. I'm going to cover a little Sergeant at Arms business for here. You know, we used to do this thing where you got fined if you're mentioned in a newspaper article, or television, or radio. Of course, maybe nobody reads the newspaper anymore, and nobody watches the news and stuff. But anyway, we don't seem to do that anymore. But I just noticed in the last week we've had a couple of folks in this club who've been mentioned, and of course neither one of them are here right now. But anyway, one Jody Magnus has received a lot of publicity about her, program she gave here about her archaeological dig over in the Middle East, and she was on the news the other night, and I also saw an article on the internet about that. And then Roy Policelli has been very involved with the soccer event that's going to happen next week at the game at Demon Stadium. Neither one of those in any of the publicity I saw ever mentioned East Chapel Hill Rotary. So, it used to be a $5 fine. Y'all remember Chuck Stone? He used to get fined about every week. It's like he was always being quoted in something, and I just figured he kicked in an extra $100 in his dues every year to cover all his fines. Also under Sergeant at Arms business is Steve Fromme is our chairman of Sergeant at Arms this year. He's following Bob Woodward. And it's two different extremes in the way they handle this. With Bob, you had a meeting, where you were basically given the, I guess you'd call it the 10 Commandments of being a sergeant in arms.
500 commandments.
Saying thou shalt not, all these different things. Each week you got an email that reiterated the thou shalt nots, all those kind of things. And I think we even had to sign an agreement or something. I think that was because of Rob Nagin, we had to sign the agreement. Steve, well, Steve pretty much just said, just try not to piss anybody off. But then he also had this in his emails, and I'm quoting this. With your assistance, we will return East Chapel Hill Rotary's Sergeant at Arms presentations to the glory of their past, revered by our membership, and feared by Rotary District. So here we go. Let's start with some baby steps on that. Anybody under the age of 60, please raise your hand. Cliff, don't raise your hand, Cliff. So that means I'm in the clear with you folks. The rest of you, if you don't like stories about old people, too bad. This senior citizen called her doctor. She was very upset. She said, "Is it true? I want to know that the medication prescribed has to be taken for the rest of my life?" The doctor said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm afraid so." There's a moment of silence before the senior lady replied, "I'm wondering then just how serious is my condition, because the prescription is marked no refills." An older gentleman was on the operating table awaiting surgery, and he insisted that his son do the surgery. His son was a world-renowned surgeon. As he was about to get the anesthesia, he asked to speak with his son. The son said, "Yes, Dad, what is it?" He said, "Don't be nervous, son. Do your best. Just remember, if this doesn't go well and something happens to me, your mother's going to come live with you and your wife." And there was another old guy. He was up getting ready to go to bed one night, and his wife told him he'd left the light on out in their garden shed. She could see it from the bedroom window. He opened the back door to go turn off the light, but he saw there were people out in the shed stealing stuff. So he phoned the police. The police asked, "Is there somebody in your house?" He said, "No, there's some people breaking into my garden shed stealing." Then the police dispatcher said, "Well, all our patrols are busy. You should lock your doors and we'll get somebody out there as soon as we can." He said, "Okay." About a minute later, he called back. He said, "I just called a few seconds ago because there were people stealing things from my shed. You don't have to worry about them now because I just shot and killed both of them. The dogs are eating right now." And he hung up. Within 5 minutes, there were 6 police cars, a SWAT team, a helicopter, 2 fire trucks, a paramedic, and an ambulance. They showed up at his house and caught the burglars red-handed. One of the policemen said, "I thought you said you shot him." He said, "I thought you said nobody was available." Don't mess with old people. Reminded me of a Mark Twain quote. "Age is an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter." It's now my pleasure to introduce to you the pride of Bushy Fort, North Carolina, the former Person Rocket, the 56th president of East Chapel Hill Rotary, Mike Clayton.
Great job. Wow, it's nice to see everybody here today. Hope everybody got a little rain the last couple of days. We did at the house. My tomato garden's looking good. All y'all are going to be beneficiaries of as we go along, especially my board members. I'm going to go ahead and do something that our Sergeant Arms forgot to go get the fine basket going. Fine Bob $2 for not passing it out. So he turned about fair play, Bob. Yes. All right. We've got a little housekeeping here to go through. Anybody got any announcements or anything that we didn't get to? Nobody, no green team stuff, anything like that. I know we got Family House dinner coming up. Joe has done a tremendous job leading that for us. I mean, gets us a lot of great publicity, a lot of goodwill. I see you need some people still this week, this coming next week. Please, if you have time to sign up for that. I know it's a good time. I participated in it for a long time. If you got problems when you get there, you won't have any when you leave. Okay. Monday the 24th, we have our second Owasso tour coming up that has been put together by Dave Moreau and a couple other folks here in the club. There's an email sent out for that. If you're interested, sign up for that. We have our teacher supply store coming up in August. The dates are wrong. It's actually the following week, the 23rd. Is that correct, Tim?
21st and 20th. The actual store is the 22nd, but we'll see volunteer opportunities.
Okay, we'll have set up August 21st, and then the store will actually be the August 22nd. This will be our 17th annual store, y'all. It's going to be at Chapel Hill High School this year. We're rotating around. We were at East last year. Tim will have sign-up sheets for participation. If you got kids that want to get into this, families, I'm sure we could use help to set up that type of thing. Let's make it a real a good event like it always is this year. To our speaker, I understand you're working on time travel. I have a special request. When you get this worked out, how about sending me back to 1986, Game 6 of the World Series, so I can tell Bucky Dent's glove to ground, darn it? Yes, I'm a Red Sox fan, and yes, this has bothered me for 37 years. So I'm hoping you get this worked out for me, because I sure want to go back and talk to Bucky about that. And with that, I'm going to get Nick Vaughn to come up and introduce what I think is going to be a tremendous program today.
Thanks, Mike. It's fun getting to know everyone a little bit more, and I just knew that bringing in a mathematician from Duke would get all y'all out for lunch today. Just wait till you see the rest of the speakers lineups we have. I was trying to think of a funny anecdote to tell about Hugh Gray. He's a world-class Frisbee player. As I was saying at lunch, he invited me to a poker game with all his math colleagues. He has a mean fadeaway jump shot that is reminiscent of Christian Laettner from the free throw line, kind of high, arcing. I know if you get a Duke move. But from a Duke math guy, he might also be the most interesting man in the world. And so I feel lucky to have known Hugh for such a long time. We're lucky to have him here today. He's going to explain the universe to us. So Hugh, we'll welcome you up. Please give a warm East Chapel.
Thank you, Nick. And so you guys know how blessed I've been to get to live next door to Nick and Katie for, over a decade. And, that was a lot of fun. Our kids grew up together. And so thank you for giving me a build-up I could not possibly live up to. All right, so. I am a professor at Duke. I'm a mathematician by training, but also have a joint appointment in the physics department. But, I've always wanted to study math that I could explain to regular people, and it was interesting, and so I'm interested in general relativity and black holes and the Big Bang and curvature of space-time and gravitational waves and, time travel, right, which is possible, by the way, right? And I'll tell you how to do time travel here at some point. But mostly I like to take questions, so you might start thinking about what your questions are right now, and let's have a conversation. That's the most interesting part. Let's first go back to 8. Yeah, go ahead. Question. Yeah.
You said this that you always want to explain this to regular people.
Yeah.
This is not honest.
Okay, above average people. All right. Go ahead.
That's not what I
meant. Let me take you back to 1889, right? And it seems like a long time ago. What could they possibly figure out, right? But in fact, they were pretty clever back then. And they were doing a kind of a thought experiment, or even before Einstein did his famous thought experiments. But you know, these days you think of like a sonic boom, right? They say you're in a jet aircraft and you're trying to go really fast, and there's a sound barrier, right? There was a question for a long time: could you actually go faster than the speed of sound in an airplane, right? And we know that in some ways you can catch up to sound, right? And sound is vibrating air molecules, and so turns out you do need a particularly sturdy aircraft, because when you pass the sound barrier, you know, air molecules don't get the message to get out of the way as fast as they would otherwise. So, but you can catch up to the speed of sound. And so then that kind of raised the question back in the 1889. They were thinking, okay, how about the speed of light? Could you catch up to the speed of light? And in particular, what is light? Right? That was a genuine question at the time. And so what is it? What is light? So they realized it had a frequency, different colors like red, blue, green. They realized that it should be something vibrating. But what was it vibrating? Right? And so now some of y'all have heard of UFOs, and it's kind of the question: is the government like hiding alien aircraft from us and things like this, right? Well, in 1889, they actually figured out a way to get on a spacecraft and go really fast, right, to see if they could catch up to the speed of light. And so they got on a spaceship and they started flying around the solar system, right? And okay, do you believe me at this point? Well, they did. They did. They got on a spaceship and they were flying around the solar system. In fact, they were flying around the sun. The name of the spaceship is called the planet Earth. Okay, all right.
Didn't see that one coming.
There you go. Well, it is, isn't it? And it's actually changing direction. It's going different seasons. It's going in different directions. And so therefore, right, in the same way that if you're on the really fast jet aircraft, right, if you measure the speed of sound, right, you see it, a sound wave, say you can see it, right, you can say the speed of sound is slowing down as I go faster, right? As I speed up, the speed of sound going away from me, and that direction seems to be less, right? And so they set up their apparatus, and they did an experiment. They said, okay, let's see if we can measure the decrease in the speed of light as the Earth travels around the sun. You should see a difference, right? And they actually are amazing how accurate they could measure the speed of light, and they kept on getting exactly the same answer, no matter what season it was, no matter which way they pointed their apparatus. The speed of light in every direction, every time of year was exactly the same, in contradiction to what they were expecting. Like, in other words, light is not like sound. And there's something different going on here, and that was the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1889. And that was the big weird question that Einstein inherited. And so he was thinking about that, and it's like, how can this be? How can this be? And so he was trying to wrap his head around it, and so was everyone else. And that's when Einstein had his first big breakthrough that made Einstein Einstein, which was he realized an answer to that question, and he realized that the universe is not three-dimensional. When we look around, we see left, right, back, forth, up, down, right? And you think, oh, the universe is three-dimensional. But he had an insight, and he realized, no, it's not three-dimensional, it's four-dimensional. And the fourth dimension is time. And this is the most natural way to make sense of this Michelson-Morley experiment, that the speed of light is the same in every direction, no matter how fast you're going. You can never catch up to the speed of light. And it turns out, guess what? The universe really truly is four-dimensional. And that's what we call it, a four-dimensional space-time. But then you're saying, wait a second, there must be a conversion factor between distances and time, right? What's the conversion factor? Like how many meters equals how many seconds, right? Well, it turns out that the conversion factor is the speed of light. The speed of light, if you study it deeply, the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. Turns out 300,000 kilometers is equal to 1 second. That's your conversion factor. And then space and time are two sides of the same coin. And it turns out there's some fancy mathematics behind it. If you want to get to the details, go to my website, professorbray.net, and I have some videos, and I have like an hour presentation where I get into the equations of what Einstein did exactly. But it turns out space and time are measured in the same units. It's just like, imagine that you go to the grocery store, right, and you can buy a gallon of milk or 2 liters of soda pop, right? And imagine no one ever realized that you could buy milk, you could measure milk in liters and you could measure soda pop in gallons. So suppose for everyone in the world before Einstein was like, nope, soda pop is in liters and milk is in gallons, right? And then this guy Einstein comes around and he says, actually, you can convert between gallons and liters. And it's a little, was it around 4 liters equals a gallon? And then people are like, really? No, come on, that's outrageous, right? It's like, no, you really can, right? And then people are like, are you saying that milk and soda pop are the same thing? And then Einstein's like, no. I'm saying that you can convert, for the thing that you measure milk in, which is gallons, you can convert that to liters, is what you measure soda pop in. The same for space and time. They're not the same thing, but they can be measured in the same units. So in other words, I'm not just 53 years old, I'm also a distance old. I'm also, the distance that light goes in 53 years is called 53 light years. So I'm also 53 light years old. And then he came up with general relativity, and you ready for this? Then he realized that not only are the units of space and time the same, but also the units of space, time, and mass are the same. And so this gives us some interesting things. So what's the distance between the Earth and the Sun? The answer is about 8 minutes, right? This is how long it takes light to get between the Earth and the Sun. What is the mass of the Earth? You ready for this one? About this much. A little more than half a centimeter, right? And here's my favorite one. What's the mass of the Milky Way galaxy? You ready? What's the mass of the Milky Way galaxy? The answer is about 1 month. All right. So mass equals space equals time. It's all unified. And once Einstein came up with this unification of space and time, that's what makes time travel possible, by the way. All right. It actually does make time travel possible. I'm going to demonstrate this for you right now. I'm going to go forward in time right now by 1 second. You ready? Go. Ta-da! Here I am, right? Okay. I've gone forward in time 1 second. Right now, what you're not impressed? All right. But I did, didn't I? Okay, and so are all you. We're all going forward in time right now, right? So what I think we all mean is, can you go forward in time a different amount from everyone else, right? That's really what we mean, right? Which is less impressive if I say, okay, I'll do a time travel to 1 year in the future, and then it turns out y'all invite me a year later, and I just come back, here I am, right? That would be not so impressive, right? But if I could just, do it in less time, right? Then that would be impressive. And so that's where the twin paradox comes in. And basically, so here you have to do a little visualization, but we tend to think of three-dimensional space as, like X, Y, maybe we put Z going like the vertical axis perhaps, right? Well, what I have to ask you to do is let's let the two-dimensional, like the XY plane here, right, let that be space, and think of the vertical direction as time, right? If you do that, and again, the universe is a four-dimensional space-time. Our brains think three-dimensionally though. So what you have to realize is that we're not a point in space-time, we're a curve in space-time, right? And so for as we go up, and so remember, time is going up, right? Each of us is a curve in space-time. More technically, every particle is a curve in space-time. But the point is, for each value of t, for each height, right, you have an x, y, and z location, right? And so we all have these curves in space-time. Now, in other words, just kind of visualize everyone in this room, and then imagine a straight line going right above you, going straight up. That's your world line, right? And it turns out that time is not something separate from time is something we each experience differently, right? So there's no universal notion of time. So if you think about Newtonian physics, everything that we were taught in high school basically about physics, you're basically seeing there's T. T stands for time. We all have the same time, right? But that's not the case in special relativity. Instead, the amount of time you experience is the length of your world line. We're all a curve, and whatever the length of our world line is the time we experience. Now, it so happens that all of our world lines are going straight up, and they all have the same length in this room, so therefore we experience the same amount of time. But what if, instead of just standing here, I start jogging laps around the room, right? Well, then my world line is making a spiral as I go up in time, right? And that's going to have a different length. Unfortunately, I can't run fast enough to have a discernible effect. Okay? So it turns out that the speed you have to be able to go is basically the speed of light. As you get closer to the speed of light, then it turns out the length of your world line starts to decrease. Everything's the opposite of what you think. It looks like it's longer, but the way you compute things in special relativity, it actually gets shorter. And so here's what could happen. Okay, I like to deal in what actually could happen. Okay. As far as we know, there are aliens out there in outer space, as far as we know. And if they were to, I mean, in fact, it's almost probable if you think about the number of, what is there, like hundreds of billions of stars just in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the known universe, right? And it seems almost incredibly, I mean, I guess it's possible we might be the only life, right? But it seems pretty likely there could be life elsewhere in the universe. And suppose their technology is sufficient, they come and they discover us. And suppose they've been observing us for some time. And of course, they go to the most interesting place on the planet, which is this meeting, right? And they're just waiting for us to adjourn the meeting because they see, oh, they're talking about cool stuff here, right? And they randomly selected one of you to be abducted at the end of this meeting. And because they want to take you and put you in their zoo back on their home planet. Right? So,
got a couple nominations.
I'll let them take Cliff. Cliff will lead everything.
So you're minding your own business, and as you leave, let's say you take the elevator. This is a good reason for not to take the elevator, by the way. Okay? If you take the elevator, you're doing it at your own risk, right? Because this is how I would do it if I was an alien. I'd wait for someone to go into the elevator. The doors close, right? And then, of course, they have special technology, and they block it where you can't open the elevator. And you start pushing the buttons, but it doesn't seem to be responsive, right? And then what they do is they start lifting the elevator straight up out of the top of the building. Maybe they've done some engineering to make that possible. And the next thing you know, you're in the atmosphere, but they have a way of keep stabilizing, so you have no idea what's going on. You're just like, why won't the door open, right? And next thing you know, they've got you into outer space. Right now, if they didn't do anything, you'd be floating in outer space, right? But they don't want you to freak out. And so what they do is they take the elevator and they continue to accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared straight up away from the Earth, right? And in doing so, even though you're in outer space, that pushes you down, right? That you're an accelerating object, right? So it pushes you down, simulating the force of gravity. And so by accelerating at 9.8 meters per second squared straight up, they can simulate the force of gravity, and you still think you're on the planet Earth, right? And you're pushing the buttons trying to get the door to open, right? Meanwhile, you're halfway to their home planet, right? Now, they can't, so now the question is, what would happen if they did that? Could they take you back to their home planet? And here's the interesting answer. It turns out it would take about a year for them to get you going close to the speed of light. About a year. And so, for example, the next closest star to our solar system is only about 4 light years away. So they could get you there in 4 or 5 years from the point of view of someone on Earth. But remember when I said that the time you experience is the length of your world line? Well, as you get closer to the speed of light, the amount of time you experience goes down. So you might only get there, even though it's 4 light years away, it would seem like it took 4 or 5 years, because they had to accelerate to the speed of light for a year also. Even if it seemed like it would take 5 years to get you there, maybe to you it only seemed like 3 years. And then this effect becomes more pronounced the further you go. And so the further you go, it might only, they could actually take you, in the most extreme cases, if they took you, let's say, they could, the Milky Way galaxy is around 100,000 light years across. And it turns out that to get you to the other side of the Milky Way galaxy would only take about 20 years of the time that you would experience. And so, and then so 20 years there, and then 20 years back, so 40 years later, you have to eat right and exercise, right, for this to work, right? But then it would be 200,000 years later on the planet Earth, but only take 40 years for you. So in other words, if we ever invent, or we ever encounter an alien civilization that gives us the technology, but if we ever invent a spacecraft which can accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared indefinitely, then just go in one direction, accelerate that direction for 20 years, and then I guess you're going to have to maybe 10 years of accelerating and 10 years to slow down, right, and then turn around and come back, right? The point is you could go 1,000,000 years into the future, you could go 1,000,000,000 years into the future. It's really kind of your choice. So going into the future actually is not science fiction, that's science fact. And this is well understood. It's even experimentally verified on a much smaller scale, of course. And so that's the time travel side of it. Now, I want to tell you what general relativity is also too. Yes, question, yeah.
So if you're going to do time travel, you have described this at the speed of light.
Yeah, you're going close to the speed of light, yeah.
Why not the speed of light?
Oh, it turns out when you do the calculations that the speed of light acts like a speed limit. It's like a barrier. And the reason is that if you do the calculation, it would take actually an infinite amount of energy to go the actual speed of light. And so this is gets into a bit of the details, but yeah, it's as you accelerate, you get closer and closer to the speed of light, but you never actually achieve the speed of light because it would take an infinite amount of energy.
So the question, you may have answered the question, but what I would be envisioning, so that when you're into getting away from Earth's atmosphere where there's the least amount of interference,
sure.
Then it's mainly a matter of the pull of gravity versus smaller pull of gravity. So is it not, are you saying that it is not physically, mathematically possible to design the weight and thrust required to be able to get past the speed of light?
Yeah, it's in terms of the standard classical special relativity.
That's what would take you back in time. I mean, you can.
Yeah, if you could go faster than the speed of light, then that is going back in time conceivably, right? So you're absolutely right about that.
Okay, so the question is, I'd like to really go back to 1950 and start all
Sure.
over.
Yeah.
But that's really not.
Well, it's probably like, okay, I would say with standard, okay, because the problem is we don't know what's possible exactly, right? So let's start with a little modesty, right? But in terms of the standard theory, right? If you gave me a spaceship that could accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared, right? I know you would never actually get to the speed of light, and therefore you could not go back in time or anything like that. Now, if you could figure out how to get around that, if you could figure out some trick, right? There's some new law of physics we haven't discovered or whatever, and you could go faster than the speed of light, then all bets are off, and maybe you could go back to 1954. You, by the way, wouldn't necessarily be you, right? It would be the older version of you going back there, perhaps, right? But and then physicists would say, wait a second. I know, darn. But then physicists would say, wait a second. Doesn't this cause like how can physics exist if we can go back in time? It's going to cause paradoxes and stuff, and that's not resolved either. But we're kind of fantasizing a little bit. Maybe it's possible, probably not.
I'm not sure you have enough time to answer this question. But you talking about this light barrier, right, which seems completely logical, sounds a little bit like what we were saying about the sound barrier back in the 50s and 60s. Right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
So do you think there's a possibility that at some point in time we'll be thinking about something new the way we look now, that the sound barrier was no big deal and we're going to be looking at breaking the light speed?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have any decent science fiction, you definitely need to pick the speed of light, right? So maybe in Star Wars, Star Trek, and they all go faster than the speed of light, I think, right? And otherwise, it just takes forever to get places, right? So that's a good question. All I would say is, here's a way to answer this question. Everyone knows Benjamin Franklin, a great American thinker, accomplished so much, right? I think of him as an example of a really smart person from his time era, let's say the late 1700s. And let's suppose Benjamin Franklin was somehow or another, aliens, maybe he didn't die. Maybe he actually was put in a zoo. We just thought he died, right? Because an alien abducted and he was put in a zoo. And guess what? He shows up here he walks in the door here, right? And he sees a flat screen TV or other amazing technology that we have, right? And I kind of, how would he react, right? Light bulbs, right? And how would he react? And I think, sufficiently, he's a very well-educated person, obviously, right? And so I think he could say, like, oh my God, it's amazing. But on the other hand, none of this violates any law of physics that he knew at the time.
A couple of his friends are members here.
So I like to think, if it doesn't violate a law of physics, then I think maybe it's possible, right? But going faster than the speed of light, unfortunately, does violate a current law of physics. And so maybe there's a loophole, like you could bend space-time or something like that, right? Which we know is part of general relativity. So but we don't know. I would call it science fiction, I can't prove it's impossible other than it violates the current theories that we understand.
What about quantum entanglement? How does that?
Oh, I mean, quantum entanglement is a great topic as well. It doesn't actually allow you to transmit information faster than the speed of light, though. It kind of seems like it does, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's a good topic. Yes?
I have two questions.
Sure.
If you are willing.
Yeah.
My daughter's really into the metasphere. I'm not sure I know what she's talking about, but she thinks about fifth and sixth and even seventh dimensions. If you could help me understand what that's all about. And the second question is the unexplained curvature of the universe as a concept. Do you think that you could help me understand that, and maybe that would help my short game?
Yeah, okay, so I'm not sure what the metasphere is exactly, is that, but you're talking about extra dimensions, right? That is part of string theory, right?
String theory, yeah.
String theory, yeah. And so there is a theory out there called string theory. And before I even tell you what that is, let me tell you what the big sort of, you asked me what's possible, what's known, what's not known. I'm an expert on general relativity. That's the Big Bang, four-dimensional space-time, black holes, gravitational waves, stuff like that. The other theory that we have going on today is quantum mechanics and the standard model of particle physics and quantum field theory. And what's interesting is that on the scale of the universe, general relativity is accurate to as many digits as can be measured. And in the laboratory, when you do particle experiments, then standard model of particle physics and quantum field theory is accurate to as many digits as can be measured. But these two theories are completely different theories. It's not clear how to unify. I mean, it's one universe, but we have two major theories, both wildly successful. And so the big question of our era, and for the next century, maybe perhaps, is how do we unify general relativity with quantum theory? And no one knows how to do that yet. And so when you ask me, is it possible? Well, given I don't even know the correct theory of the universe yet, I can't say for certain what is possible and what's not possible, right? And no one can. But both those theories are wildly successful. And so, people are trying to figure out how to get them to come together. String theory is an attempt to try to unify these two theories, which has been very fashionable for the last, almost 50 years, but in various peaks and valleys. But now it's people are starting to say, wait a second, you've had your shot. It doesn't seem like it's working. But nevertheless, in string theory, the universe isn't four-dimensional. Remember I said it was 3 plus 1 dimensional, 3 space dimensions, 1 time dimension. Well, turns out their ideas don't work unless you add roughly 6 tiny dimensions. So, you need to add in some tiny dimensions, and then that particular theory works out. And so, if you imagine a power cable, or say a telephone cable, and imagine an ant walking on the telephone cable, right? Is that a one-dimensional world? Well, it looks like it's a one-dimensional world. You go forward and back, right? But if you zoom in really, really close, you see you can go around the cable also, right? And so you have a tiny dimension and then a big dimension, right? And so technically it's two-dimensional, but one of the dimensions is really tiny. And so then they speculate, maybe there's some tiny dimensions in our universe. They've never been detected. There's never been an experiment that's measured these tiny dimensions. And so until they do that, I'm thinking that those tiny dimensions aren't there. But it could be, right? Maybe they're just so small that we can't measure them.
Yeah, so I've heard many times this whole thing about, the time travel and you go fast, like the twins, right?
Yeah.
One takes off in the spaceship, comes back, and he has. Now, so I guess I could get my head around that part, but how do you relate the time to biological aging? And what is the, what do you experts say on that part?
Oh, great question. So it turns out that so far we haven't figured out how to send a human being close to the speed of light, because frankly, it'd probably kill you, right? Like, it would take, like I said, it would take a year of acceleration to get you going close to the speed of light. And so we don't have the technology to do that. However, they have gotten subatomic particles going close to the speed of light. And in fact, there are cosmic rays coming in from outer space that are going close to the speed of light. And some of them are radioactive and decay at a certain rate. And what they can find is that when these particles are going fast, their radioactive decay exactly obeys the law that the time you experience is the length of your world line. So in other words, it would appear that the length of your world line, not a universal time coordinate, but the length of your world line, whether you're a particle or a person, that's actually how much time you experience, and that's how much aging you have as well. So they've actually done this experiment where they take 2 atomic clocks, they line them up side by side, they're saying exactly the same time, and then they put one on a really fast jet aircraft. They fly it around for a few hours. They land, and they can measure the time difference based on this effect, and it comes out exactly as predicted. Yes.
Duke bought a lot of land out in eastern North Carolina to reduce its carbon footprint.
Okay.
Is what you're doing gonna contribute to that prospect?
Oh, I didn't know that they did that. And so, no, I don't, nothing I'm doing has any carbon footprint implications, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes?
Thank you for doing what you do so I don't have to worry about it. Does the universe have an end?
Okay, wonderful question. So this is what I understand. Now keep in mind, I'm a mathematician really. I sometimes pretend to be a physicist, right? But what I understand is that, let's talk about theory and then the practice. The theory from general relativity is actually quite fascinating because, you know, Einstein came up, I just described special relativity to you all. Now, general relativity is his next theory, right? And that's the next idea, that's curvature of space-time. In other words, this four-dimensional space-time isn't actually necessarily flat, it can be curved. And that's a whole other idea which really captures our imaginations, captured my imagination. But once Einstein wrote down the Einstein equation, which describes general relativity, there was this Russian mathematician named Friedman. And he did some computations, and he actually answered your question, which is he found out that according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, there must either be a beginning or an end to the universe. And he published it in a reasonably prestigious journal, and then it was promptly ignored by everyone. No one paid attention to it at all. And then Lemaitre, who's a French theologian, he rediscovered this the same thing. The Einstein equation implies either a beginning or an end, and then no one paid attention to his work either. And then finally, Robertson and Walker, an American and a British guy, I guess they had the right nationalities for once, they rediscovered the same fact, that the Einstein field equations imply that the universe must have a beginning or an end. And then it became the talk of the town, and everyone was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And perhaps another reason they paid more attention to it is that there was this guy, this American named Edwin Hubble, who had been looking through his telescope, and he was looking out, and he said, wait a second, everything's moving away from us. And it's as if the universe was, we're in the aftermath of a big explosion of some kind. Why is everything moving away from us, right? And so the idea that the universe was actually not in a static state, the fact that it was expanding had been experimentally measured. But even before it was experimentally observed, right, it was theoretically predicted by the theory that there must either be a beginning where you have a big bang and an explosion, or an end, or both, by the way. And so one thing, and then you look through telescopes, you see that the universe is expanding, and then that predicts the, then you say, oh, I guess there was a big bang. And if you're still kind of skeptical, and maybe everyone should be skeptical of this stuff, what's really amazing is that if you look through telescopes, it's not that you have to take anybody's word for it, right? You can literally see the Big Bang through telescopes. Like if you want to see, more or less, almost exactly that, if you want to see what the universe looked like 1 billion years ago, just look at something 1 billion light years away, right? Because the light's just now getting to us. If you want to see what the universe looked like 5 billion years ago, just look at something that's 5 billion light years away, and they can do this, right? So you can actually look back in time. And in fact, one thing that's weird is they can't see anything further than about 13.8 billion light years away. There doesn't seem to be anything else to see. And then furthermore, what do they see 13.8 billion light years away? They see this very faint sort of glowing. And it's like, oh, what is that light? It's in every direction, and it's very, very uniform. And what is that very faint glowing? And then you realize, you know, it's very faint, but you know, given how far away it is, that's actually pretty bright. I mean, if you look at something really, really far away and it's like you can see it, like, oh, that must have been really bright back in the day. I mean, if you're looking at something that's really bright, just really, really far away. And it turns out that's the afterglow of the Big Bang. And so you can actually see the afterglow of the Big Bang. Now the question was, what will happen to the universe eventually? And apparently, even though it would be theoretically possible to have a Big Bang and then a big crunch, we have enough, we have what you might call escape velocity, or Big Bang was sufficiently energetic that will expand forever. And so I think there's something they call, things eventually, the sun will eventually cool, and unfortunately, things will sort of even out with the universe. And I think they use the term heat death or something like that. Eventually, everything will become very dark and cold and silent. And then you can keep on going. I'm not an expert on what happens exactly, but yeah, I mean, you've only got a few billion years to get your affairs in order, and then it's going to be kind of cold around here. So, like, as a species, we're going to have to figure something out in the next few billion years. Here, I'll try this side of the room. Yeah.
What data has just come out of the Webb telescope that has questioned the Big Bang theory?
Oh yeah, so there's some. I mean, I think what there's. I'm not an astronomer exactly, but there is something called the Hubble tension, and that is, and I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to exactly. It might be, but there is. When you look at the Big Bang theory, Einstein's equations work remarkably well. But when you come up with the best model in recent years, in the last couple of years, they've have 4 or 5 or 6 different sources of data on trying to measure that Big Bang exactly. And it turns out that the data is mostly in agreement, but not entirely in agreement. As they get more and more accurate measurements, there's a mystery, which is they don't really quite understand what's going on. So I would say the data in total still suggests a Big Bang, but and an expansion of the universe, absolutely. But like different data sources, so they're off. I mean, they might be the rate of expansion of the universe. Maybe one measurement would disagree with another measurement by a percent or so, right? Like very small. So it's not, and that shows that we don't quite understand everything, right? And so that there's something called the Hubble tension, and of course they're always getting new data all the time. And this Hubble tension is one of the biggest, most important problems for physicists to figure out. Yes.
I just wonder why you can see 13.8 billion light years ago.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's the end? What is there? Maybe that's a limit we can see now.
That's true. That's true.
Repeat that question, please.
So here, I'll repeat the question. If you look 13.8 billion light years away, right? Then maybe we just can't see any further than that, right? It doesn't mean that there's necessarily like the universe began at that point, right? And one thing I will say is that if you extrapolate and look at that afterglow that's 13.8 billion years in every direction, one thing is you can say the temperature of the universe then was hotter than the inside of the sun. Okay? So you know how when you go out in outer space and it's cold, right? Unless you're next to a star, right? But mostly space is empty and it's cold, right? So for the first, here's a crazy fact that blows me away. For the first 50,000 years, okay, I'm going to say, when I say the Big Bang, that's sort of a theoretical thing, because let me also point some other little asterisk right on all this, which is that we don't really see the Big Bang. Remember I said we can see the afterglow of the Big Bang? We can't actually see, it's like seeing the center of the sun. I can't actually see the center of the sun because it's too bright, right? So you can't actually see the Big Bang. So we don't really know for sure what happened with the Big Bang. Now there's theories that do amazing calculations, and it would appear there was something at least very close to a Big Bang. But one people theorize maybe there was a big bounce, maybe there was a previous universe, right? And that universe collapsed in on itself, and it got down very, very small and very, very hot, and it just sort of bounced and had what we think of as a Big Bang, but doesn't preclude the possibility that there was a whole other universe before that, right? Or maybe there was a sort of a parent universe, and then some quantum fluctuation happened. All of a sudden, a Big Bang happened in the middle of its deep space of that parent universe, right? And then we think of our universe as all that there is, but in fact, we came from another universe. So there's all kinds of possibilities. The reality is we can only see close back to the Big Bang, but not the actual Big Bang itself. Yes?
And when they say they can see these things 7 billion light years away or 13 million, how do they determine how each of them is that old? How can they say these?
Great question. Great question. And if you had asked me that question 20 years ago,
what's the question?
Okay, the question is, when I say that they see stuff 7 billion light years away, how do they know it's 7 billion light years away? How would they determine that, right? And the astronomers are amazing. Let's just start with that, right? Astronomers are amazing, right? And that's what people do for a living. It's all they do, right? But roughly speaking, if the dimmer something is, you figure the further away it is, right? So you see a bunch of galaxies, And then you look at it like, oh, that one's pretty bright. Oh, that one's dimmer, right? So you can say, okay, well, how bright is it, right? And that gives you like a hint as to how far away it might be. And then you start noticing patterns, which is that there's something called redshift. And it turns out, if you guys know when a train's passing you, you hear the Doppler effect, right? You know, the train, here it goes, right? It's like it makes the tone changes, right? And so it's higher pitches it's coming at you, and then lower pitches it's moving away, right? Well, it so happens that you get that with light as well, and this can be measured. And when something's coming towards you, it looks bluer than it actually is, and when something's moving away from you, it's redder than it actually is. And so, you know, by looking at redshifts, you know if it's coming towards you or away from you. Now, as far as getting distance, it is a problem, okay? Because you can say, oh, I mean, you don't know what the absolute brightness of things is, right? Like, how do I know what the actual brightness is so that I can look at the observed brightness and figure out how far away it is? Well, it turns out there are certain objects in the universe that always have exactly the same brightness. And these are called type 1a supernova. And these types of they're supernovas. And so they always explode, they're events, and they happen with exactly the same brightness. So not all supernova events are the same, but these particular type of supernova events are always explode with the same brightness. And what's cool is then they can figure out exactly how far those events are away. And then the discussion just goes on from there. But this actually gives people the ability to figure out, you know, how far away things are and how far are they moving away from you, because those supernova events have different redshifts, right, based on color. So not only do they know exactly how long ago they happened and how far away they are, they also know how fast these supernovas are moving away from us, and by the redshift. And then you put it all together, and they can actually measure the size of the universe, the relative size of the universe in terms of the expansion as a function of time. And they actually have a graph, and it goes to zero around 13.8 billion years ago, and then it was expanding. And then here's the real kicker. The real kicker, and this was a Nobel Prize that was awarded, I think 2011 or so. But the real kicker is the universe seems to have been expanding. It's sort of like if you took a balloon and started blowing it up, right? The balloon's getting bigger and bigger, and we're a bunch of dots on the balloon. Each dot is a galaxy. You're blowing it up, everything's getting further away from everything else. Are you ready for this? The expansion, it started, it was expanding, but because of gravity, the expansion was slowing down. And then around 3.8 billion years ago, it started to speed up, right? And so that's what they refer to as the accelerating expansion of the universe. It's only been happening for a few billion years. And the best explanation people can come up with for how this is happening is called dark energy. So if you ever hear of dark energy, this is what supposedly accounts for the accelerating expansion of the universe. There's a funny story about dark energy. It's also known as the cosmological constant. Einstein was the first to play around with the cosmological constant. He introduced it in one of his papers to try to get a static universe. And then more data came out that said the universe wasn't static, and so he felt embarrassed and called introducing the cosmological constant the biggest blunder of his career. And he died thinking it was a blunder. And then someone else got a Nobel Prize for observing it. Many decades later. Yes?
Question about time travel.
Time travel.
Can you help me get to July 14th, 2024, and back to July 14th, 2023? And it's totally selfish because I just want to get an idea on what the stock market looks like.
There you go.
So I can make some prudent investments.
Yeah, probably no one knows how to do that now. But it's the going the forward in time we can do, but the going backwards in time, that's what no one knows how to do in terms of standing there. I'll go to this side over here.
Talking about space and time, how does gravity factor in any of these?
Oh, great. Well, I mean, essentially, general relativity is a theory of gravity. And so, okay, this will be fun. You ready? Okay. I'm going to tell you what gravity is. And it's going to blow your mind. Right? Because it's not what you think it is. You've heard of the force of gravity. There is no force of gravity. Okay? Remember the elevator in outer space that was accelerating 9.8 meters per second squared? Remember that? You remember that if you go into the elevator in this building and close the door, Einstein said that, I feel gravity in the elevator on the planet Earth, not moving, right? I also feel gravity if I'm accelerating at 9.8 meters per second squared in an elevator in outer space. Therefore, they're the same thing. right? They feel the same, therefore they are the same, okay? Turns out this is our current understanding of gravity, because would you say there's gravity in outer space? No, this you're an accelerating frame of reference, right? The elevator is accelerating 9.8 meters per second squared that way, right? And so therefore it's pushing you against the ground. You're an accelerating frame of reference. There's no gravity, it's just that you're an accelerating frame of reference. You feel the chair underneath you right now? There's no force of gravity. You're an accelerating frame of reference. You are all in a frame of reference that's accelerating that way, 9.8 meters per second squared, and that's pushing you down in your chair, right? Now, you're like, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, BS. And by the way, that's what everybody said tonight. Well, a certain percentage. In fact, it was around year 2000. I was a professor at MIT, assistant professor. And there was an older MIT professor there. We went out to dinner for some other occasion, and someone decided to start some trouble and said, hey, Hugh, did you hear Professor here and so-and-so doesn't believe in general relativity? And he was trying to get us to argue, and the older professor was like, he didn't want to play. He was like, he had the conversation. So around by year 2000, physics professors and math professors were all coming around like, okay, fine, he's right. All right, it sounds outrageous, right? And the community took a long time to come around to accept the idea that we're in an accelerating frame of reference right now. But that's the theory of general relativity. Let me make the argument. So probably your main objection is that if we're all in an accelerating frame of reference going that way, well, like it doesn't look like I look out the window, but I would say, no, the trees and everything else, they're all going 9.8 meters per second squared that way too, right? But then you're like, wait a second, what about people on the other side of the planet, like in China or something, right? Are you telling me the same thing for them? Like, yeah. Well, why aren't we getting further apart? Right? We should be getting further apart, but we're not. And that's because matter curves space-time. Space-time is not flat. That argument works if you're on a flat space-time, doesn't work if you're on a curved space-time. Let me demonstrate with an analogy. Imagine, visualize the globe, right? Imagine someone at the North Pole and they have a friend and they're talking on the cell phone, they're at the South Pole, right? Now, if that's the North Pole, I could walk a tight circle around the North Pole and clearly curving, right? Now imagine someone does the same thing at the South Pole and they walk a tight circle. Let's say where we have the same longitude every time, right? We're doing it in sync, right? Okay, now imagine they get closer and closer to the equator, right? And they continue to make bigger and bigger circles. At all points, they're curving around the North Pole and the South Pole, and they're curving away from each other, but they're on a constant line of latitude, right? They're not getting any further apart, even they're both curving away from each other. And so that shows how if you're on a curved space, just because you're curving away from someone doesn't mean you're getting further apart. So Einstein's big idea, and this is like the deepest, okay, I have 3 words that I'm going to propose as the deepest amount of content you can put into 3 words in the English language. Matter curves space-time. Okay. That's what Einstein's theory of general relativity is. Because, I mean, let me tell you how deep that is. First of all, what the hell is space-time? Right? And then, by the way, what the hell is matter? Let me tell us we don't know what matter is either. Okay, we have some insights, but I still don't think we know the final word on what matter is. Curves, that's called differential geometry. That's what I am. I'm a differential geometer. I study curvature. It's a fascinating subject, but it's complicated, right? What do you mean curves exactly, right? But basically, the reason the moon goes around the Earth is because the moon's actually trying to go in a straight line, but space-time itself is curved. And matter curves space-time. The Earth is putting this huge dimple in space-time, and that's causing the phenomenon of gravity, which is the moon going around the Earth.
One more. All right. Can you tell us what you did as a child?
Whatever my parents told me to.
Here's what. No, there'll be a pop quiz next week, but here's what I want everybody to do. I want everybody to space-time continuum 1 week from now and be right back here for the next Rotary. Everybody have a great